I was always doing playing instruments and playing music, and I've been enamored with film music at very young ages, from films of like Star Wars, Back to the Future, and the like. But it wasn't until I was at high school that I knew that with my musical talent, I could actually possibly do that. So I was actually working regular jobs, and I put myself through Mannes College of Music, 2 years worth of composition and orchestration, and I got into, and a lot of it was private instruction too. And I realized that I could actually acquire the tools to do something I always admired. So it was sort of, I guess, what are you, 18, I guess, right? Between the high school and college years, 18 and 19, I guess that age is when I realized that it's something that was attainable to me.
Right. Well, and you also have to have a feel for storytelling. I mean, you when you watched movies, did you always feel a kinship to story?
Oh, I mean, without it, I consider myself, very emotional. So I get very into movies. Whether some people might consider the movies I like bad or just I always get into the storytelling of a movie. So I feel very connected, and I always thought, with that and the fact that I could convey a story musically and to help that process, it always enamored me. But yeah, I always felt, that I could really, really dive into a story, and how a movie, sets up with the first, second, and third act and everything, and how characters evolve. So when I realized that music was actually a part of that storytelling, when I actually was old enough to separate the idea of there's the film, there's the visuals, there's the audio, and there's the music, and there's the dialogue and everything. When I was able to break apart the pieces of a film, and at that time being a musical person, that I could actually be able to do that's when I knew that, okay, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to be able to help stories be portrayed, because I loved how movies made me feel, whether they be, sci-fi, drama, or horror, or whatever. I love the feeling that I was sucked into that world, and I think part of what helped me get sucked into that world was the music. So, being a musician. And at a young age, I was even writing, very, very small compositions, nothing crazy. But the fact that I was able to write music and help, or to think that I'd be able to help a story be delivered in a cinematic way, was something that I became very passionate about.
Well, it's an interesting art form, because unlike something that you do for a band, or your own personal kind of music that you're creating, you're creating it in service of something that already exists, a movie and another person's vision, a director's vision. So that's a very kind of special challenge, and it requires you to be a chameleon in a way.
Yeah, you have to be very adaptable and very, I actually have this conversation a lot. I mean, when you write music as an artist or a band, you have a sound. Like, that's the band sound. That's the artist's sound. And even nowadays, I mean, directors get hooked on certain artist sound, and then that artist comes in and is actually hired to score the film because of their notable sound. But the way I sort of taught myself how to not deal with scores, but sort of how to approach scores, was be versatile, be able to adapt to each director's vision. And that part of that whole collaboration, I think one of the better parts of filmmaking is that collaboration, is working with the director to convey his vision. Because I was in bands, I wrote songs and everything, and as much as I love that, I lean towards love working with a director who has a vision, and I'm there to support that vision and mold the musical background to help to carry the story.
Yeah. Well, what kind of direction do you like? Because, not all directors, I would assume the vast majority of them, I mean, they know what they like, but they don't necessarily know the musical terminology. So what is that ideal communication with a director like for you?
Some directors I've worked with have had some musical background, and that's always fun. It's difficult when they have a lot of musical knowledge because they try to convey to you, specific musical terms, and it's not what I mean, my ideal situation is when a director talks in feelings and talks in what he wants a viewer of a film to feel. I mean, I don't need to be, someone doesn't need to tell me, oh, I think this should be, this piece should be in a minor key, or this piece should, use this scale. I mean, that confuses me more. It makes the job more difficult than if a director talked to me in colors of emotion, or what, like I said, what the viewer of the film should be feeling. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, the ideal director-composer relationship that I like is when they use their knowledge of storytelling and emotion and convey that to me. I mean, and being that I feel that I'm, very emotive and responsive to that, it's my job as a composer, or just any job. It's any composer's job to translate that, and deliver music to support that vision.
Well, and another thing that I don't think people think about with film composing, it's a lot like acting. If we associate someone with a certain role, there's a danger that they're going to be typecast. And I'm sure that you've been hired, a lot of the work that anyone does is based upon what they've accomplished previously. So do you find that you, sometimes in your career, you have to fight against, can you give me what you did on this other project?
Yeah, that happens. I mean, I think that happens a lot to pretty much every creative person. I do. I mean, obviously, I have a lot of horror indie films under my belt. I have some sci-fi drama stuff, and I love it all. And I love the opportunity to branch out. But once you have a certain repertoire of a certain style, it's inevitable. I mean, you're gonna be seen as a guy that can do that type of music, and there's nothing wrong with that. But being, myself being a composer who loves to do all different styles. I mean, that's how I trained. I mean, my goal as a composer, learning and studying was to be able to, deliver anything possible for a director or, a producer, whatever, for any type of film. So it is a little frustrating, I would say, that when you do a certain amount of films of a certain style, you do sort of get pigeonholed with being requested a lot to provide, horror scores or, drama scores, or, I mean, this is for any composer, not just me, dramedies or whatever. I'm sure there's some dramedy composers out there that would love to do an action score or do a horror film, but, their body of work is a lot of dramedy. So, a lot of people think it's, okay, we need dramedy. This is the guy who does dramedy. And unfortunately, in a musician or a composer's head, that's not how we work. We would love to be able to do, speaking from my point of view, I mean, we'd love to be able to do any kind of style. So, right. But, when directors are going through a list of composers, they have a list of composers or whatever, and they sort of block guys off, and it's like, okay, this guy has maybe one horror film, but 5 dramas. Okay, he's a drama guy, but he might love to do horror films. So, yeah, it's tough sometimes. And I being in the early part of my career, I'm trying to, get a large amount of different styles in my repertoire. But then again, if I have, if a composer has so many different styles, it's like, okay, what does that guy do? What's his strong point? What can we hire him for? He's done so many. It's like, so it could be, an asset to be able to do all different kinds of styles, and it can be, it could go against you too.
Yeah, it cuts both ways, I guess. I mean, that's why I'm so amazed by someone like Jerry Goldsmith, who was given the opportunity to do everything. I mean, I can't think of a more diverse film composer. because he could conquer any genre.
Yeah, and he ended. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
He did ended up using a lot of innovative synthesizer elements in his very organic scores, which was different at that time.
Mm. Very much so. And I'm curious about the synth sound because I mean sometimes I guess it's is it a consideration of budget sometimes as much as creative consideration, or how does that decision to go with the synth sound work for you?
That's a good question. Like with a film I scored last year called Contracted, it was a horror thriller, and right off the bat, regardless of the budget, the director and the producers wanted an all synth score. They wanted not as in synth orchestra or sampled orchestra. They wanted it all synth pads, drones, beats and stuff. So that was basically their guide right from the beginning. And but then there's times when the director on a whether it be low budget or large budget is they want the orchestra, but they also want synth. And with a lot of the stuff I do, and I think that which is part of my style is I'm always incorporating some sort of modern synth sounds into my organic palette. It was just I can't think of a score I've done in the past that has had orchestral elements, whether live or sampled, that does not have some sort of modern synth element, whether it be beats, drones, pads, or the like. So, I mean, it all depends on the director's vision, and I don't think the score. I try not to let the score or the budget drive the sound of the film. If that makes sense.
No, I think it's the greatest plight for anyone on the creative side of filmmaking. How do we keep the nonstop compromises that we have to make? How do we keep those from affecting the quality of our movie? And that's something that concerns every single person on a filmmaking team.
Exactly.
But the synth sound is particularly popular in the horror genre. But I'm curious from you because a lot of times I find that it's used more like sound effects than actual themes. And when you hear music in your head for a particular film, do you always kind of want to think thematically?
That's it. I usually that's my default mechanism is I go in thinking thematic. I go in thinking sounds, but sometimes the score doesn't need that. I think for the latest one that's just released, Cabin Fever Patient Zero, it was a combination of both. I mean, there were organic elements and synth elements, but some of the sound and synth stuff was very sound designy. There was sound effecty, and it's more or less, and that discussion is had, well, at least with me and on Cabin Fever, that discussion of what the synth elements of the score would be doing. I had that with the director. I had that discussion with director Kari Andrews early on in the process of how we were going to approach the score. We knew the virus needed to have a sound, and it ended up being a combination of organic orchestral elements and some synth hits and everything that ended up just being these two simple low tonal hits with delayed string glissandos. So and that became the sound of the virus. So that it was that process happens and on what type of sounds are used when, at least the way I like to do it is when I speak with the director and what his vision is of the film and what he wants certain motifs to sound like and how he wants certain aspects of the film supported.
Yeah, and when you're doing a score for a video game, which you've done a lot of, and very distinguished scores too for the video medium. What kind of different musical muscles does it flex for you as opposed to film?
Well, I mean, there's the one obvious one is that you're not writing linearly as far as like a storyline goes. I mean, that's one thing I like about the film aspect of writing for films is that, you know, you're writing, like the way I like to write is chronologically from beginning to end, to mold the music with the story. In the video games, you have to think in terms of individual pieces to support different individual events in the game. And on top of that, you have to make those pieces, if for lack of a better term, is modular. You have to make them be able to have sections of each music work on their own, loop on their own. I would not write a piece of music for a game like I would write it for a film. I would write a piece of music for a game thinking that there's going to be sections of this piece. So like if I write a 3-minute piece of music for a game, if I have to write sections within that 3-minute piece of music that can work and stand alone by themselves and loop over and over and over again. So as you're creating this, extensive piece of music, you have to not only think of it as a beginning to an end, but you have to think of it as sections. And then also think of it as a multi-layered, I mean, all music is multi-layered, but you have to think of how each of these layers are going to sound if they are isolated on their own. Because a lot of times with the interactivity of games is you have to deliver music not only in short loopable sections, but sometimes you're requested to also provide the stems of each section or each layer of the music, whether it be, okay, we just want this to be a string and percussion track. So you have to be able to deliver a string section and a percussion section to provide those individual assets for the developer so they can implement it into the game in the most interactive way possible. Mm. So it's definitely two different beasts altogether. But you're still writing music, but it's definitely two different trains of thoughts on how to approach a piece of music. Because you're not really approaching a video game piece of music as an entire piece of music from beginning to end. You have to think and be able to evolve the piece so it can be a 3-minute piece of music and be an enjoyable listen and work as a whole, but you have to make sure it works as individual parts within that piece. Yeah. And that you don't do in the film music cues.
Do you think that, I mean, looking over the kind of the history of film scoring, and I'm thinking of the big lush orchestral stuff and the Bernard Herrmann stuff all the way to John Williams to Tangerine Dream in the 80s, what they did for film. Right. And do you see kind of different trends or styles in movie music through the decades, and where do you think we are now today with movie music in general?
I definitely see the trends. Some are in favor of certain trends, some are not. I mean, there's, like in the 80s and the 90s, there's the big, epic orchestral stuff like you were saying, even in the 70s, obviously. But in the 70s, there was a lot of, dare I say, groundbreaking synth scores. But now it just seems like what seems to be the trend now is this crazy polished, overproduced Hollywood sound that is great for these huge epic $1 million movies. And then then I think that I don't think how do I put this? I don't think that a lot of composers can voice their true voices if they're being called upon to do a multi-million-dollar film. And I'm not talking about the A-listers out there. I mean, they have their sound. They're called upon because of their huge epic sound. But I'm thinking, what I'm trying to say is like the lower budget stuff, the indie house films and everything. I think composers, I think that's the playground for composers now is that's where you really truly get to introduce new sounds and possibly, a new trend, is because there's so much art within the indie film productions that to me, I think they're looking for new sounds. They're looking for new ways to do things, and the young composers coming up are able to, young composers with their new voices. But I definitely see trends, I guess of every 10, 20 years there's always a constant of each trend within the film industry. Some are more prominent than others at times. Like now, now it just seems now it's the Brian Tyler sound, the Hans Zimmer sound, and those huge epic sounds. It's like that seems to be the go-to sound now, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's like that's what Hollywood is thinking now. That's their mindset now. They had attached that sound with all the Marvel movies, the DC movies, to Transformers, all these epic. I'm talking huge epic movies. That's the sound they have associated with that. So that seems to be the trend now. But the likes of, Alexander Desplat and, Marco Trami and all those, who are awesome composers. They're all there. There's AAA composers, but they don't have that sound. But I think the trend is right now is the over the top, and dare I say, Zimmer sound.
I agree with you, and I think those people that you mentioned like Desplat, and they're exceptional. I think years ago about the scores that David Shire did, like The Conversation or Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3 or Straight Time or the really weird Morricone scores like U-Turn, which is like
right.
as eccentric as you can get. Today's scores kind of, for me, they kind of bleed into one another. They're not as distinctive. It seems like the studio's not willing to take a chance on an outside of the box score like they used to be.
Well, that goes on, in my opinion, is that goes along with the entire movie making process now. It's like it doesn't seem no risks are willing to be taken now. It's like there seems to be this overly agreed upon formula for movie making, and they don't want to deviate from that because they're afraid it's gonna lessen the money in their pocket almost,
Mm-hmm.
So I think they've gone with this, and I just, it's a shame. I truly think it's a shame, that not taking anything away from the creatives making these movies. But I just think that there can be a more diverse sound across the board when it comes to film music in this day, and I wish there was.
So what does it mean to you because your Cabin Fever Patient Zero, that score is available for purchase now, isn't it?
Yes, it's on. I believe it's on iTunes and Amazon currently. Yes.
So when you score a film, it's done entirely for the service of the film. Does it feel like just icing on the cake that you have it available as an album that people can purchase now? Listen to me saying album, like albums still exist. Yeah.
It's all the thing.
Yeah. So how does that feel for you, that people can buy your music and listen to it individually of the movie?
As a soundtrack fan myself, I love it. It's great. It's great to have something of mine out there for a film that I actually scored. Growing up listening to soundtracks and everything, I never thought that, that this could possibly be something for me, as a kid, So now to have that and have a couple of soundtracks out there and have people enjoy listening to them and emailing me or tweeting me or whatever. This might, I don't know if it's selfish or ego, but I like it. It's a great feeling, and I love having the ability to have it available separate from the film, because sometimes it's not so easy to get the soundtracks out in a market that seems to be, in a lot of distributors' eyes, it seems to be dwindling. But you hook up with the right distributor, and especially with these indie films, and you get it out there. I mean, it's a great feeling. I mean, I love it. I really do like it. I love when the fans email me and tweet me, and I do my darndest to get back to each and every one of them at this point in my career. And it's a great feeling. I really do enjoy it, and I'm glad it can happen.
Yeah, it's super cool, and it's very heartening to know that there are film score geeks out there that, like I mean, I consider myself a big film score geek that actually engage in what you're doing in a very special, meaningful way. It's good to know that they're out there.
Yes, exactly. It's a great feeling. I mean, it's essentially what I was growing up. I dive into the soundtracks and I go right back into the film, and it's a connection with the film and the experience you had watching the film, and to enjoy that away from the film, I always thought was awesome. And the fact that I can do that for somebody, it's just a great feeling.
Yeah. So before I let you go, this is always the last question I ask any composer I interview. Could you name like 4 or 5 of your favorite scores, whether they be popular or obscure, or what's essential for you?
Okay, let's see here. Oh boy. All right, well, I mean, I'm going to go with the one score that got me into music from the beginning was the Star Wars A New Hope with John Williams. I mean, that was the one. Next, I would have to say Goldsmith's Alien. Let's see, what over the years. I mean,
which one is that? What is that one?
Goldsmith's Alien.
Oh, yes. Okay, yes.
So that one, they're all going to be these iconic scores, obviously. Growing up, you don't get to, get your hands on, small film score. I'd actually, without delaying this, I mean, I could just ramble on. So it was Williams, Star Wars, Goldsmith, Alien, and I have to say Silvestri's Back to the Future made an impression on me. And these are, I'm going my favorite of all time because of how they impacted me growing up and learning and everything. Because my favorites currently, they jump from film score to film score lately. 4 has to be one of my favorite, I guess I would have to say odd, eclectic scores, is Howard Shore's The Cell.
Wow. Yeah.
And what's another one of my favorite scores? Essential. Oh my goodness. Now, see, I've done all those 4 from my past, and I'm trying to think of the more recent ones, and I'm all over the place. Darn, I'm stuck on only 4. Did I do 4? Yes, I did 4.
No, those are great. I mean, I me and I have a very close friend that collects scores, and he has tens of thousands of them. I'm not that. I don't have a collection that large, but there are some scores that I continue to return to time and time again, and they're those big, lush orchestral scores that you mentioned, and then something like John Williams' Accidental Tourist, which is like the opposite of what he normally does. It's very Chopin-esque. And then the Splat does incredibly unique work with like Birth, and I like Thomas Newman's Meet Joe Black. That's a very like lush,
that's
romantic.
True, yeah.
Oh my God. So I'm all over the map like you too. I mean, it's so fun for me to talk to somebody that does this for a living and is obsessed with it as I am.
It's so hard to pinpoint. Yeah, it's so hard to pinpoint a favorite or even just 5 favorites. I mean, I can go back to I listening to Miklos Rosa scores. I mean, I had a period of time where I studied his scores and I loved his stuff. So I mean, I don't currently listen to any of his scores now, but there was a period of time where I just did nothing but listen to them. So if you asked me back then what my favorite scores were, it would be one of his.
Yeah.
So I guess it just matters, But that's why I chose, when people ask me questions like this, I choose what were the bigger influences on me as I was studying and learning about film scores.